The voicemail came in at 11:47 on a Thursday night, and I almost didn't listen to it. My name is Thomas Aldridge. I'm 41 years old. I work as a land surveyor out of Kelowna, British Columbia, the kind of job where you spend more time standing in a field with a tripod than sitting at a desk, where the work is quiet and methodical, and most people couldn't explain what you do at a dinner party. I've been doing it for 16 years. After my divorce, I kept doing it. It was the one thing that didn't require me to feel anything other than precise. The voicemail was from Margot. I hadn't heard her voice in 2 years, not since she left. I poured a glass of water, stood at my kitchen counter, and pressed play. Hey, I know it's late. I wanted to hear you say something back. I don't know why I called. I'm sorry. Never mind. That was all. I set the phone face down on the counter and looked out the window at the lake. Okanagan Lake runs the length of the valley like a long dark mirror, and from my kitchen window on calm nights you can see the lights of West Kelowna reflected on the surface, everything doubled and trembling. I stood there for a while. Then I went to bed. I didn't call back. But I didn't delete the message either. Let me go back a little. Margot and I met at a trivia night at a pub on Bernard Avenue. She was on the opposing team. She knew the capital of Bhutan and the third ingredient in a Caesar, which in this country is a personality trait, not a cocktail order. I lost to her team by 2 points and asked her to tell me what I'd gotten wrong. She did, without hesitating. I liked that. I liked that she didn't soften it. We dated for a year and a half. Got married on a Saturday in September at a vineyard just south of town. Her parents drove up from Penticton. My brother came in from Halifax. It was small, the way we both wanted it, 32 people and a lot of good wine and a band that knew how to read a room. We were married for 6 years. It didn't end dramatically. There was no affair. No blowout fight that cracked something permanently. It ended the way a road does when it simply stops being maintained, slowly, quietly, until one day you realize you've been driving over potholes for so long you've stopped noticing them. Margot wanted to move to Vancouver. She'd been offered a position at a marketing agency there, a real step up, the kind of opportunity that changes the shape of a career. I didn't want to leave the valley. My work was here. My routines were here. My brother had moved to Kelowna by then, and his kids were small, and I'd become the kind of uncle who showed up on Sundays. I told myself I had good reasons. I probably did. But the truth is I also had a deep, stubborn relationship with staying still, and I didn't examine it closely enough until it was too late. She went. I stayed. We tried the distance for 8 months. Then we didn't. I kept the house on the east side of the lake. Small place, cedar siding, a deck that faces west, so the sunsets hit you straight in the chest every evening if you're standing outside. After the divorce, I replaced the furniture in the living room, but left the kitchen untouched. The same cutting board she'd bought at the farmer's market on Water Street. The same cast iron pan hanging on the wall hook. The same hand-painted mug she'd picked up at a craft fair in Summerlin the summer before she left. White glaze with a dark blue rim, slightly uneven, made by a potter who sold maybe 40 things a year and didn't have a website. Every morning I used that mug. Not because I was sentimental, or that's what I told myself. I told myself it was just a mug. It held coffee. It worked. My brother Isaac saw through that immediately. He came over one Sunday morning about 6 months after the divorce was finalized. I was standing at the counter in my robe, pouring coffee, and he watched me reach for the blue-rimmed mug without looking, the way you reach for something that's found its place in your body, and he said, "Is that Margot's?" "She left it," I said. He looked at me for a moment the way only older brothers can. That particular expression that contains an entire assessment of your situation without a word being spoken, and then he picked up his own mug and said, "Right." That was it. But the question sat with me for weeks. When Margot called that Thursday night, she was engaged to a man named Broderick. I'd heard through mutual friends he was a partner at a commercial real estate firm in Vancouver's downtown core, one of those companies whose glass tower offices you see from the Lions Gate Bridge. I looked him up once, not obsessively, just once. LinkedIn, polished photo, impressive title, the kind of profile that had clearly been carefully maintained. He had the look of someone who had never been uncertain about a room he'd walked into. I heard about the engagement through a friend, a text that said simply, "Did you know Margot's engaged? Just saw it on Instagram." I read the message, set my phone on the counter next to the blue mug, and went outside to stand on the deck for a while. The lake was flat that day. Everything was very still. I didn't feel what I expected to feel. I felt something older and quieter, like finding out that a road you used to drive every day has been closed permanently. 3 weeks after the voicemail, Margot texted, I'm going to be in Kelowna next week, you. Just to talk. I owe you a conversation. I read it twice. Then I wrote back. Sure. She came on a Wednesday evening. I heard her car in the driveway. That same green Subaru she'd had since before we met. The one with the camping sticker on the rear window and the passenger mirror held on by a piece of electrical tape she'd never bothered to replace. She knocked, which she'd never done before. That small thing told me more than the text had. She was wearing a gray sweater and her hair was shorter than I remembered, cut above her shoulders. She looked the same, and also, like someone who had been carrying something heavy, long enough, that it had changed the way she held herself. She came inside and stood in the kitchen doorway the way people do when they're not sure if they're allowed to move further into a space that used to belong to them. You still have the cutting board, she said. It's a good cutting board, I said. She almost smiled. I put the kettle on. We didn't talk about Broderick that night. We talked about her parents, who were dealing with her father's early-stage Parkinson's diagnosis, something I hadn't known, and the news landed in me harder than I expected. We talked about Isaac's kids, who she'd always adored. We talked about the pub where we'd met, which had changed hands and changed names, and now had a menu that neither of us would have recognized. She stayed for 2 hours. When she left, she paused at the kitchen doorway again and looked at the mug on the shelf. You still have that, she said. It wasn't quite a question. It still works, I said. She nodded slowly and left. Looking back now, I understand what she was doing. She wasn't visiting to catch up. She was checking something. Like a contractor walking through a building they'd designed, running their hand along the walls to see if the structure still held. She was asking the kitchen questions she couldn't ask me directly, and the kitchen was answering. She came back up the following week, and the week after that. The excuses were perfectly reasonable. She was in town helping her parents with a series of appointments at Kelowna General. Her father's neurologist was here. The follow-up specialist was here. She needed somewhere quiet to work between appointments, and her parents' place was small and loud with worry. Could she use my kitchen table? Of course she could. She'd arrive in the mornings with her laptop and a folder of papers, spread out at the table, work steadily for a few hours. I'd come back from job sites at noon and we'd eat lunch together, something simple, soup, sandwiches, whatever was in the fridge. She'd work for another hour and then leave to get her father to his appointment. She'd text when she got home, just to check in. Nothing heavy. I noticed things in those weeks. The way she talked about Vancouver had a particular quality, thorough, detailed, correct, but hollow in a way that was hard to identify precisely. She described Broderick's apartment, a high floor in a coal harbor building, with a view of the inlet, and used the word impressive 3 times in one conversation, in the careful way you use a word when you're trying to convince yourself of it. She talked about the life there, the dinners, the professional circles, the events, with the same measured fluency someone uses when they've rehearsed a story enough times to tell it smoothly but haven't felt it in a while. I recognized the pattern. It was the same voice she'd used in the last year of our marriage when someone asked if she was happy, and she explained, very reasonably, all the ways in which she should be. One afternoon she looked up from her laptop and said, Broderick doesn't understand why I keep coming back here to help with my dad's appointments. He says I should just fly them down to Vancouver. As if my dad would agree to that. She paused. As if that's even how it works. I didn't say anything, but I watched her jaw set the way it did when she was holding something back. The following Saturday, Broderick came to Kelowna. He arrived at my door unannounced, which told me everything about how he understood the world. No text, no call, no acknowledgement that this was someone else's home and someone else's time. He simply arrived. He was taller than I'd expected, well-dressed in the way that signals money without displaying it, the kind of man who'd clearly decided very early on that confidence was a resource you controlled, not something that arose from a situation. He shook my hand. His grip was the kind that extends a beat too long. He looked around my kitchen the way someone appraises a property they haven't decided whether to purchase. Thomas, he said, like he was confirming a file. Margot's mentioned you. Good things, I hope, I said, because it was the thing to say. All good things, he said, smiling. In a way that had nothing to do with warmth, he stayed for 40 minutes. The entire time he directed the conversation, about his firm, about a development project near Nanaimo, about the apartment they were looking at in the West End, larger than the current one, better building, better address. He didn't ask me a single question about myself. Not one. Not what I did, not how long I'd lived here, nothing. I was furniture in the room, something that held position but didn't require acknowledgement. What I noticed most was how Margot sat while he talked. Straight, still. Her hands flat on the table. Not relaxed, not engaged, positioned. Like someone who has learned exactly how much space they're allowed to take up. When he stood to leave, he put his hand on her shoulder and said, "Ready, Marg?" She didn't correct the name. She'd always hated being called Marg. She glanced at me once, briefly, before she followed him out. Her eyes said something I didn't fully translate until much later. After they left, I stood in my kitchen. The mug was on the shelf. The cutting board was on the counter. Outside, the lake was doing what it always does. Sitting there holding everything in its reflection, patient and indifferent and very large. Isaac came over that evening. I didn't call him. He just showed up with a six-pack of Okanagan Springs and the look on his face that meant he already knew something had happened. I told him about the visit. He listened without interrupting, which is how I knew he was taking it seriously. Then he opened a beer, handed it to me and said, "That guy controls her." "You've never met him," I said. "You just described him for 15 minutes, he said. "I've met him." He was right. I knew he was right. But knowing something and knowing what to do with it are different problems, and I wasn't ready for the second one yet. A week passed. Margot texted to say her father's next appointment had been moved, so she wouldn't be in town. She sounded fine. The text was brief and normal and told me nothing. Then 12 days after Broderick's visit, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. It was Margot's mother, Helen. I'd always liked Helen. She was direct and kind in equal measure, the kind of woman who made you tea and told you the truth in the same breath. She apologized for calling out of nowhere. Then she said, "Thomas, I don't know how to say this without just saying it. Margot's not okay. She keeps coming up to help us, but she's not here for us. She's here because she doesn't have anywhere else to go that feels safe. I think you probably already know that. I just thought someone should say it out loud." I held the phone for a moment. "Thank you for telling me," I said. "She's not going to ask for help," Helen said. "She never does." After I hung up, I sat at my kitchen table for a long time. The mug was on the shelf. The evening light was coming through the window the way it does in October in the valley, low and amber, hitting everything sideways. I thought about what Margot had said on one of those weekday afternoons, almost offhand, talking about the Cole Harbor apartment. There's no space in that kitchen for anything. Broderick had it redone before I moved in. Everything's built in. There's nowhere to put anything that's yours. She'd laughed when she said it, but she'd said it. I drove to her parents' place in Penticton the next morning. It's 40 minutes south on the highway, through the canyon, and then back down into a narrower valley. I didn't call first. I figured she'd tell me not to come. She answered the door in a jacket and hiking boots like she'd been about to leave, or maybe had been standing near the door, not quite deciding. She looked at me for a long moment. "How did you know?" she said. "Your mum called me." She closed her eyes briefly. Then she stepped back and let me in. We walked down to the beach at Skaha Lake, a 10-minute walk from her parents' house. It was a cold morning, the kind of sharp October cold that feels honest. No pretense of warmth. We walked for a while without talking, the gravel crunching under our feet, the lake flat and gray to our left. Then we sat on a bench that looked out over the water and she talked. She talked for a long time. All of it, in one long unspooling, the way people confess things when they've been holding them alone long enough that the weight has become unbearable. Broderick managed the money. Her paycheck went into a joint account she didn't have full access to. Any significant purchase required his agreement, not because they'd discussed it as a system, because he'd set it up that way before she'd understood what she was agreeing to. Her friends from before Vancouver had mostly faded out, not dramatically, just quietly, the way people disappear when plans keep falling through and calls keep going unanswered. He was always busy on the weekends her friends wanted to visit. Her schedule always had something else in it when she looked ahead. She'd stopped playing her guitar. She'd had it since university, played it badly and enthusiastically and often. He'd mentioned once, early on, that it wasn't really in tune with the aesthetic of the apartment. She'd laughed. She'd put it in the closet. That had been 18 months ago. The engagement had happened fast. A dinner, a ring, a public announcement on social media. He'd proposed at a restaurant where his business colleagues were also dining, which meant she'd smiled and said yes in front of an audience assembled entirely by him. She'd told herself it was romantic. She'd mostly believed it. "I signed a lease on a place in Cole Harbor," she said, staring at the lake. "I mean, we both signed it. But I didn't choose it. I didn't even choose the street. He had the whole thing arranged. He just needed my signature. She was quiet for a moment. You know what I thought about on the drive up here last month? The first time. I thought about your kitchen. I thought about that mug. She paused. I told myself I was being ridiculous. You weren't, I said. I told myself that if it was still there, she said slowly, then I'd know something. I don't know what exactly. Just something. I let the silence hold for a moment. It's still there, I said. She turned and looked at me. Her eyes were red, but her face was steady, the kind of steady that cost something. I know, she said. I looked. I didn't say what I was feeling. I wasn't sure yet what it was, love returning to a body that had gone still, or just the recognition of something that had never actually left. Maybe both. Maybe they're the same thing at a distance. What I said instead was the truest thing I could manage. You don't have to figure out what this means yet, I said. You just have to figure out the next right step, and that step isn't about me. She looked down at the gravel. I know, she said again. I reached into my jacket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. Isaac had given it to me 2 days earlier without comment. A name and number. A family lawyer in Kelowna he said was thorough, fair, and impossible to push around. I handed it to Margot. She read it, folded it smaller, and tucked it into her coat pocket. We walked back to her parents' place. At the door, she stopped and looked at me. Thank you for coming, she said. Your mum called me, I said again, because it was easier than the truth, which was that I would have come anyway. She nodded, then she went inside. I drove home. The highway through the canyon was quiet. The poplars along the river had gone yellow, the bright particular yellow of Okanagan October, and they stood against the brown hills like something insisting on being seen. The next 4 months were the hardest kind of quiet. Not empty quiet. Full quiet, packed with things happening that I wasn't part of, and choosing not to be. Margot called the lawyer. She started the process of separating her finances, which took months and required the kind of documentation that revealed, piece by piece, the full architecture of what Broderick had built around her. Her name was missing from accounts she'd assumed she was part of. Her credit history had gaps she hadn't known existed. The lawyer, a woman named Frances who Isaac described accurately as someone Broderick would find extremely difficult to intimidate, moved carefully and completely and did not lose ground. Broderick did not handle it graciously. He called Margot's parents twice. He called her firm and made vague suggestions to her manager that she'd been unstable lately, a move that backfired when her manager, who'd worked with Margot for 4 years, called Margot directly to tell her what he'd done. He left long voicemails that began reasonably and ended somewhere else. Isaac intercepted one of these calls. Broderick had somehow found his number and told him, very calmly, that this would be the only warning before Isaac involved the relevant people. Broderick hung up. Through all of this, I kept my distance from Margot. Not because I didn't want to be close. Because wanting to be close wasn't the right reason to be close. If she came back to me before she could stand solidly in her own life, we would repeat the same pattern in a different form, her needing an anchor instead of building one, me providing it and calling it love. I'd done that before without knowing it. I didn't want to do it again. So every 2 weeks I left a bag of groceries at her parents' door when I knew she was in Penticton helping with her father's appointments. Good bread, cheese, the kind of fruit that takes effort to find off-season. I texted when I'd left it. Front step. I never knocked. I never waited. She texted back once. You didn't have to do this, I wrote. I know. And then I didn't reply further because there wasn't more to say. She therapist in Vancouver she liked. She described her in a short text as very no-nonsense, which feels like what I needed. She went twice a week. She sent occasional short updates, a photo of a book, a message that just said good session today, once a picture of a coffee cup at a table by a window. The cup was white with a blue rim, almost the same as mine. I looked at that photo for a long time. In February, the news broke about Broderick's firm. A CTV investigation reported that his company had been under review by BC's Financial Services Authority for irregularities in strata fee management across multiple residential developments. Fees collected, funds misallocated, investors quietly shortchanged in ways that had taken years to surface. His partner issued a statement. Broderick didn't. 3 weeks later, 2 of the firm's largest institutional investors withdrew. The firm's managing partner resigned. Isaac showed me the article on his phone at my kitchen table and said, he doesn't just control people, he controls paperwork. Apparently, I said. Frances saw this coming, Isaac said. She told Margot's lawyer it was a pattern. The settlement moved faster after that. In March, Margot's name came off the lease. The accounts were resolved. The separation was clean. Frances had done exactly what Isaac said she would. Spring came to the valley the way it always does. Reluctantly, then all at once. The orchards came into bloom through the second week of April, and driving north from Penticton you go through miles of white and pink before the lake appears again, and everything opens up. I've lived here my whole adult life and I still think it's one of the most unreasonably beautiful things a person can see from a car window. Margot called me on a Saturday morning in late April. Not a text, a call. I answered on the second ring. "Hi," she said. "Hi," I said. "I'm in Kelowna," she said. "I have a box of things in my car that I should have dealt with a long time ago. Some of them are yours. Can I come by?" "I'll put the kettle on," I said. She arrived 20 minutes later. She was wearing a blue linen shirt and her hair had grown out again past her shoulders. She looked the way people look when they've done something very hard and come out the other side of it and haven't yet decided what to make of the person they are now. Uncertain, and also underneath that, more present than they'd been in a long time. She had a cardboard box. She set it on my kitchen counter. Most of it was practical, a book I'd lent her, a carabiner from a camping trip, a scarf I'd completely forgotten existed. But at the bottom of the box, wrapped in a tea towel, was a mug. White glaze, dark blue rim, the same uneven glaze as mine. The one she'd found, she told me, at a ceramics market in East Vancouver. A potter who turned out to have learned her craft from someone who'd once sold their work at a fair in Summerland. She'd bought it weeks ago and hadn't known what to do with it. She held it up. "I thought," she said, and then stopped. Tried again. "I thought it was time to have my own." I took the mug from her and set it on the shelf beside mine. They sat there together, the old one, its bly faded and uneven on one side, and the new one, its rim still clear and bright. Different ages, same intention. I said, "Stay for dinner." It wasn't a grand declaration. I wasn't ready for one. Neither was she. But she put her jacket over the back of the kitchen chair, the same one she'd always used, without thinking about it, and said, "What are we making?" We made soup. Split pea with good smoked ham, a recipe her mother had written out on an index card years ago, and Margot had memorized without meaning to. She knew where everything was. The salt was in the second cabinet from the left, same as it had always been. She reached for it without looking, and I watched her notice that she'd done it. Watched something in her shoulders release, that she hadn't known she was holding. We ate at the kitchen table with the October light fading, and then November, and then winter, and then spring came back around again. There wasn't a single moment that announced itself as a turning point. There was just time, and meals, and her guitar coming out of wherever she'd stored it, and filling the house with sound that was slightly off-key and entirely alive. In September, a year after the first voicemail, I asked Margot to move back to Kelowna. Not to move back in with me, at least, not right away. She'd been staying more nights than not, and her things had accumulated in the guest room, and then migrated out of it. And at some point her hiking boots had become a permanent fixture by the front door, but I wanted to ask rather than assume. I wanted to ask because that was different from what either of us had done before. She said yes without pausing, which I'd hoped she would, and then said, "I want to find my own place first though, just for a little while, so I know it's mine." I said, "That's fair," she said. "You know that's not me leaving." "I know," I said. She found a small apartment in the North End, a 10-minute drive from my place, and lived there for 5 months before she moved in properly. The guest room became a music room. The hiking boots stayed by the front door. The kitchen table had 2 coffee cups on it most mornings, hers and mine. On the shelf above the sink, 2 blue-rimmed mugs stood side by side. The old one, its rim gone pale on one side, and the new one Margot had brought in that cardboard box. Every morning we reached for them without looking, like breathing. Like something you do before you decide to. The day Margot told me she'd made her first major financial decision alone in years, opened her own TFSA, chosen her own investments, signed her name on the paperwork without checking with anyone. She didn't make a big deal of it. She mentioned it over dinner, matter-of-factly. The way you mention something that felt important in the quiet way important things do. But I saw what it meant. I watched her say it and recognized the specific weight of a person who has found their own footing after a long time of standing on borrowed ground. I thought about what Owen would say if Owen were here. Isaac said something similar enough. She didn't come back to you. She came back to herself, and you happen to still be in the same place she left you. I wasn't sure that was entirely fair to me, but it was mostly true, and mostly true is about as good as things get. Margot's father is doing better than the prognosis suggested. He's slowed down, but he's stubborn in the particular way that seems to run in that family, and Helen tells me the stubbornness has been useful. We drive to Penticton most Sundays. Isaac's kids have reached the age where they like to come along, which means the drive involves a debate about which playlist is acceptable and someone asking if we can stop for Timbits, which the answer is always yes. Broderick was fined by the FSRA. His firm restructured. He moved to Calgary, or so I heard through a mutual acquaintance who mentioned it, the way people mention things they know are none of your business but feel useful to say. I didn't think about him much. There wasn't room. The mug is still on the shelf. Both of them are. I used to think I kept the first one because I'd forgotten to throw it away. I've stopped believing that. You don't reach for something every morning for 2 years without understanding somewhere below the level of words that you're choosing it. You don't keep the one chipped, faded, unremarkable thing from a marriage that ended quietly on a weekday and call it habit. You keep it because it holds something you're not ready to name. The night Margot left the first voicemail, she said, "I wanted to hear you say something back. I didn't call. But I didn't delete it either." Maybe that was already the answer. Maybe we both knew it and spent 2 years finding the long way around to saying it out loud. Have you ever kept something small, something most people would have thrown out, because letting go of it felt like agreeing to something you weren't ready to agree to? Drop it in the comments. I read every single one. And if this story stayed with you, hit like and subscribe. There are more of these. There always are.